Terminator Dark Fate is the newest installment in the Terminator franchise that ignores the events of the previous three films as a direct sequel to Terminator 2. And if you've seen the previous films, then you basically know the plot of this film, which is a Terminator is sent back in time to kill a person that's a big part of the future war between man and machine, but the Resistance also sends someone back in time to protect that target the Terminator is programmed to kill. This film also has Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton reprising their iconic roles as the T-800 and Sarah Connor, because I guess they needed a paycheck to afford a bigger headstone. I'm a huge fan of the first two Terminator films, with both of them being the first R-rated movies I ever watched. I was around 8 when I first watched them, and are also two movies that piqued my interest and love for movies. But I can't say the same for the sequels. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was a dull and uninspired sequel that had no reason to exist other than to be a cash grab that ruined the legacy of the first two films. Terminator Salvation, while not bad, never reached its full potential, even with the fact that it took place in the post-apocalyptic future and didn't retread the same time travel story of the first three films. And Terminator Genisys was a convoluted and boring mess of a movie that had a ridiculously stupid story, mediocre acting, uninteresting characters, horrifically ugly visuals, and featured one of the worst written screenplays I've ever seen in a big-budget studio movie. Needless to say, my expectations for Terminator Dark Fate were incredibly low, and surprisingly, this movie didn't turn out to be as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was worse! Before I tear Terminator Dark Fate into absolute shreds, I'll briefly talk about the few, and I mean few positives I can say about this film. One is the performances from Mackenzie Davis, Linda Hamilton, and Arnold Schwarzenegger are pretty good, but boy do I have some complaints of how their characters were handled that I'll get to later. Another positive I can say about this film is that I think the action scenes are, for the most part, competently handled and crafted. They aren't anything groundbreaking, but they get the job done and are entertaining to watch. Now, let's get on to why Terminator Dark Fate is an absolute abomination against mankind. But I must warn you, I will talk about major spoilers for the movie, so if you haven't seen it, turn off the video, go watch the film even though I personally don't recommend it, and then watch the video. I don't even know where to begin with this film. I guess I should start with how this film not only disrespects the legacy of the first two films, but also has a ton of plot holes, ignores or forgets certain plot details from the previous films, and rehashes plot elements from the other films as well. This film begins with a scene that takes place 3 years after the events of T2, and shows Sarah and John Connor on a beach when suddenly a random T-800 model that was sent back in time walks up to John and shoots him point blank in the chest with a shotgun, killing him. I'll be honest in saying that I wasn't completely against the idea of killing off John at first, because it could have worked if they did something interesting with it, but this film doesn't at all. It makes the first two films mean nothing in the end. Kyle Reese's entire character and his arc meant nothing. Sarah surviving the events of the first film and giving birth to John meant nothing, and the entirety of Terminator 2 Judgment Day meant nothing. The mission to protect John Connor and destroy Skynet meant nothing because no matter what, he's gonna die, and this new AI called Legion is gonna take over the world. This film is a disservice to the first two films, and I cannot believe they thought killing off the core character of the franchise was a good idea. This film tries to justify that decision by introducing this new character named Danny, who is the leader of the Resistance in the future like John Connor, but the film poorly handles her character and is so on the nose with the fact that she's like John that I almost died inside while watching it. Also, how is it possible that Skynet sent a T-800 to kill John Connor when in Terminator 2, Cyberdyne and other things like the ARM and CPU of the original T-800 from the first film were destroyed? It makes no sense whatsoever. But then again, this movie has a ton, and I mean a ton of plot holes. I could go on for an eternity of how many plot holes this film has and how it ignores or forgets plot details from the previous films. For one, Arnold's T-800 in this film goes against his programming, went rogue after killing John Connor, and then decided to settle down and have a family. The reason why Arnold's in this film is not only so laughably bad, but also contradicts a major plot point from the first two movies. In the first movie, Kyle Reese states that a Terminator cannot be reasoned with or have emotions and is programmed to do what it's told to do. And in the second movie, the T-800 recognizes at the end that he cannot integrate with society or be capable of forming human behaviors. But this movie throws that plot point completely out the window. Sure, Terminators can look like people and handle interacting with people, but they're not supposed to be capable of becoming human and are only programmed to complete their mission. They play it up for some lifeless emotional scenes in comedy, and it does not work at all. Another major plot hole involves the whole idea of Legion and the Terminators. Legion is basically the same as Skynet, being a military AI that launches nukes to destroy humanity. But my big question is, if Sarah Connor prevented Judgment Day from happening in T2 like she states in this film, and thus Skynet doesn't exist, how come all the Terminators look nearly identical to the ones that Skynet made, despite the fact by Terminator 2's logic, they don't exist in the future? Also, there's a major plot point in the movie where the T-800 sends Sarah Connor text messages that show the time and locations of Terminators time traveling to the present so she can kill them. But how does he know where they're going to be, despite the fact that he's from a different timeline than the ones being sent back in time? How does a single person kill a Terminator, despite the fact in the previous films it took usually more than one person to take one down? Who's sending back these Terminators that Sarah Connor kills? If it's Skynet, that would be impossible, considering they don't exist in the future, and if it was Legion, she surely would have known about the Rev 9 model that was sent back in time to kill female John Connor. This movie is almost as confusing and convoluted as Genesis, and it doesn't even involve time travel as that film did. Dark Fate also recycles a lot of the same story beats and elements from not only the first two movies, but also Terminator 3 and Terminator Salvation. The plot follows the same structure as Terminator 2, but with everything done worse. The villain is a mixture of the T-1000 from T2 and the Terminatrix from Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Mackenzie Davis's character being a human-machine hybrid is straight from Terminator Salvation, with Sam Worthington's character also being a hybrid. There are two action scenes that are similar to the ones in Terminator 2, and the way the Rev 9 is taken out is a mixture of how the Terminators in the first film, the second film, and the third film are taken out. It's hilarious that this film is trying to ignore the previous three sequels like they didn't happen, but steals elements from them and does them much worse this time around. Terminator Dark Fate also has some of the worst characterization I have seen in any Terminator film. The main character Danny is in my opinion the worst main character in the entire franchise, and the actress who played her did an atrocious job. We barely know anything about her, know nothing about her personality or how she feels about anything, and has no arc to speak of. She's basically the polar opposite of Sarah Connor from the first film. In the first film, the character of Sarah Connor was given a lot of development and time to grow and mature over the course of the movie, going from being an afraid and confused waitress to becoming a strong and defiant woman who took out the machine that was trying to kill her. Keep in mind, this was before she turned into the character we all know and love from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Danny is as generic as you can get with a teenage girl character in a film, and I find it laughable and ludicrous that she's supposed to be the leader of the Resistance in the future. Mackenzie Davis's character Grace is also underdeveloped, and I think there was a lot of missed potential of her as well. Her character can fight and move really fast, but only in short bursts, and she's given all these cybernetic enhancements that are slowly killing her, but the film never gives much thought to how these enhancements affect her, and the film also never explores the idea of how she feels about time traveling from a post-apocalyptic wasteland to a prospering and somewhat nice current time period. Sarah Connor also isn't really given much to do in this film aside from having a few cool moments in the action scenes, and she really doesn't have an arc aside from the one she has with Arnold that really goes nowhere. Arnold's character also feels underused and really doesn't do much aside from delivering some deadpan humor and having some cool moments during the action scenes. He dies once again in this film, and I honestly did not care at all because he's died before, and each film progressively makes the T-800 into a joke, so it doesn't have any emotional weight. Remember when the T-800 used to be cool and incredibly threatening? Yeah, I long for those days, because it honestly feels disrespectful at this point with the way they're treating Arnold. But it's not a Terminator film without him, so I guess they had to include him. The main antagonist of this film is a new model of Terminator called the Rev 9, and unsurprisingly is a lackluster villain that the dull retread of the T-1000 has a solid endoskeleton made of liquid metal like the TX from Terminator 3. This film tries to replicate what made the T-1000 so threatening and scary, while also trying to make it more human than the T-1000, and it just doesn't work. Robert Patrick's T-1000 was memorable, because there was something unnatural about him, even with him being a machine, from the way he moves, how emotionless his expressions were, his calm yet unsettling way of speaking. Now he kills people with his curious nature of wanting to see them in pain and suffering. He was a cold and ruthless character that had a hint of something darker and more sinister behind him. Here, I never felt threatened or intimidated by the Rev 9 in the slightest. The film is also inconsistent with how it uses its powers. It can make another version of itself, shapeshift into other people, and at one point manifest a gun. But the film only shows its abilities when the plot requires it to, even though all these abilities would have really helped it out in the fight. The visual effects in this movie are also horrifically bad. A lot of the CGI felt unfinished and fake, particularly during the action sequences, where there are some shots that feel like they belonged in a video game. CGI for the Rev 9 is also poorly done, and the shots of liquid metal feel like rejected visuals from the movie Venom. Seriously, Terminator 2 came out 28 years ago, and the CGI used for the T-1000 looks infinitely better than the CG used for the Venom Terminator, as I call it. The de-aging effects at the beginning of this movie might be the worst I have ever seen in the movie. Linda Hamilton, Arnold, and not Edward Furlong look so atrocious that I thought I was watching a cutscene from a Terminator video game, except those probably look more realistic than this. I just want to know who approved of the de-aging effects, because they deserve to be fired for how awful they looked. Tim Miller's direction also feels incredibly lackluster, soulless, and has no style to it whatsoever, which surprised me considering he also directed the first Deadpool movie. While that movie isn't anything revolutionary when it comes to directing, at least it had a distinguishable style, has a ton of energy and life, and was well done for the most part. I have no clue what happened here. In conclusion, Terminator Dark Fate is another terrible film in this franchise. It just keeps on getting worse and worse with each new installment. Dark Fate is a messy, lifeless, and ungodly boring rehash of the same things we've seen in other Terminator films. It also simultaneously spits in the face of the legacy of the first two films and everything they established. I have no clue what James Cameron was thinking when he approved this movie to be the official continuation of Terminator 2. But I'm pretty sure he didn't really care, because he's too busy making 10 billion Avatar sequels that no one cares about. It's between this film and Genesis for being the worst film in the franchise. I really hope after this one, the franchise is terminated for good, because I don't know if I can handle much more of it. And judging by the box office numbers of this movie, it seems unlikely we'll get another sequel. To close this video, I'm gonna let a scene from Terminator 2 Judgment Day illustrate how I'm pretty sure me and most fans feel about this franchise after this train wreck of a movie.
Hasta la vista, baby.